Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast as we continue our 2024 Illinois football positional previews. And this is for the diehards, Joey. This is the pod that, these VIP members that are asking us about long snappers and really get into the Illini too deep, that actually read my 3,000 word piece on the backup offensive line. This is for you. This is for you guys. We appreciate you. And this is fun for us because it's two big storylines, two positions, two areas of the team that cost Illinois some games, but also had some good moments as well. It's the offensive line, as Illinois really struggled early last season, and then the special teams, which had some ups with Caleb Griffin and I thought Hugh Robertson last year, but boy, that return game really cost them at times. So, Joey, these are two areas that need more consistency, that is for sure.
Yeah, that's the key for both of these two, and two kind of, I don't know, there's some turnover, some significant turnover in both of those rooms. So I'm excited to get into it. And I know we're going to start with the offensive line, Jeremy, because I don't know if you can wait any longer.
Of course we are, because this 5'9", 185 used to be 185, up to about 2 bills now. But yeah, 180.
Welcome to the club, buddy.
High school. Yeah, I'm into offensive line playing. It means so much, right? And it's part of why Brett Bielema has been successful in his entire career is the trench play. But obviously it struggled last year, Joey, when Zy Chrysler didn't work at right tackle. They really didn't have depth to make up for all of that. We've talked about how those injuries really impacted him not being prepared for that role with a lack of reps in the offseason. But Illinois bet on it and didn't have the depth to overcome it. And it really was a big contributor to their 2-4 start, along with the defense that struggled early last season. But it did get settled in late last year. But the top storyline has to be, for me, did they fix their issues in the transfer portal? Are they as deep as they now think after adding J.C. Davis, a plug-and-play left tackle from New Mexico, after adding Melvin Priestley, who's been maybe one of the surprises of the transfer portal, given that he enters the season as the no doubt starting right tackle? I think we can say that now. And Kevin Wigginton, who we don't even know if he's a number 7th or 8th offensive lineman in this group, despite starting at Michigan State last year. So has their prep recruiting developed and matured to the point? Has their transfer recruiting helped to the point where this can be a strength of the team again? That is the main storyline.
Yeah, it's huge. And I'm kind of conflicted between this main storyline being the depth, because I think that was a huge piece and an issue for them last year. And do they just have 5? Do they have 5 guys right now that they feel comfortable? I think they do. I don't know how comfortable they truly felt coming out of fall camp a year ago with Zy Chrysler being so limited with his ankle and moving to an entirely new position. So I think it's probably a mix of the two there. I do think that there's that 5 feels set to me, the starting 5. We'll get into that here in a second, Jeremy. I do think
Werner Jr. said that the other day. He said it's pretty solidified. Yeah. And
I do think there are options behind them now, guys who will continue to push, guys in some of these, your Hunter Whitenecks, your Mountis Mollers of that first class. And then now really the class of 2023 and beyond, your TJ McMillans, your Brandon Hendersons, probably too early to throw your Brandon Hansons, your Zafir Stewarts in that conversation, but they've really elevated the floor there. And I think overarching, can they get back to who they want to be? They want to be nastier than hell. They want to be physical. They want to be punishing in the run game. Can they get back to that? Because it just didn't feel like for the first half of the season, and again, they whiffed on their big bet at right tackle last year. They didn't have that. And you saw that start to come a little bit more as the season went on, but just they've got an identity of who they want to be. They've never shied away from that. They've never pivoted off of well, this year we're going to be this. That's been a pretty constant for what they want that group to be. So can you be that for 12 games or 13 games?
Yeah, and I thought, you lose 2 really good players. Julian Pearl, I thought was an above average left tackle in the Big Ten. Was he all Big Ten left tackle? No, he wasn't one of those top guys, but he was a pretty good left tackle, and those guys are hard to find. And then Isaiah Adams was one of the best guards in the Big Ten in his first year, got moved to right tackle, struggled there the first 2 games. I thought he played really well over the last 8 games, and he was just a 3rd round draft pick. So he's obviously a tough talent to replace. But I do think there's a lot of optimism when you look at this starting 5, because one of the things I do think we overlook is that Josh Geske and Josh Kreutz were first-time starters last year. So in addition to moving Zy Chrysler, you had those guys going through their natural growing pains of their first years as starters. Well, they now have experience and now know what it takes. And I think they should improve off of being what I thought was serviceable as starters last year. Now, can they be above average starters? Now, can they be good Big Ten players? And I thought Zy Chrysler, he's just a much better right guard. He has proven himself at right guard the last 2 years. So not only have you added these tackles that we can get into, Joey, but I think one of the storylines we should talk about more is all those guys on the interior, the three starters, Geske, Kreutz, and Chrysler. On paper, they should get better. And from what we hear from Bart Miller and the staff, and of course, everyone's optimistic, but I think there's reason to be optimistic that those guys are going to get better. They're not stagnant.
Yeah, I think Josh Geske in particular is more comfortable at guard. Remember last year, in the spring, he played some right tackle, and then he played right guard, and he really settled in that left guard spot. And I think having him and J.C. Davis to build that continuity, we heard a lot about that with Pearl and Adams last year, right? It's a big reason why they didn't want to move off of those two off the left side. It does matter to know who you have next to you consistently. I think having a spring and having a fall for those two to develop that. And Geske, sometimes I forget how big Josh Geske is until you're talking to him. And he's a punisher in the run game. And he needs to shore up some of that pass protection stuff. I don't think that's a secret. The grades bear that out. You watch it bears that out. He was a first-time starter a year ago, and a guy who really until was it Purdue? He was injured at Purdue, if I'm not mistaken. It was kind of a little bit of a disjointed season in terms of he started at right guard, and then he moved to left guard. He was a little bit of moving and shaking, and then he had – remember maybe an ankle, I think could have been what his deal was in the middle of the season. So but he did settle in later last year, Jeremy. And I think that consistency of knowing where you're going to be for a calendar year is really helpful. And Josh Kreutz, he's going to be a captain. I'll be floored if that guy's not one of the team captains. His voice matters. He's mean. He's just a mean guy on the football. He's very nice to us, but he's got that, like, I think it's been described like him and his brother James, a little intense. If you're picking a fight, you probably want those two from the team to follow you in there. And he knows, like, all that's cliche, right? But he knows that he had a serviceable year last year. And he wants to take that jump to an all Big Ten. Bart Miller said he wants to come out and he wants to dominate. Like, that's a mindset you want from a guy he's been through the fire. He knows what's expected of him. And now it's like, okay, know the speed of this. Let me go out here and play. Let me go out here and take my game up a level.
In so many ways, he reminds you of Doug Kramer, right? Like, undersized, under-recruited. They're probably sick of hearing all that, but they become starters pretty early in their career. Doug was just his second year, but Josh Kreutz in his third year, and we thought he could in his second year, but Alex Postrom really stepped up there. But he showed he can do it last year, and I think they thought he could, but that dude played every freaking snap of offense. Every snap. So he's dealing with an injury during training camp with a knee. We'll see if it holds him out any games. Brett Bielema sounded optimistic it wouldn't, but this is a guy that is one of the heartbeats of the team, and I do think he's going to be a good player. And then Chrysler, man, he just sounds more confident. Like, he went through the ringer last year when he was put on that island, when he's never had experience doing it. It was not a good plan. And, I think they hoped Desmond Schuster would be ready. And obviously he had a medical issue, and it just did not work out for him. And I felt for him through that. But he seems to have gone through the fire, and now he's back at where he is. And he's a mover. Like, he can move people up there. And I think now he's a little bit more comfortable and confident. I just expect that group to take a step forward. But then Illinois went and got 2 starting tackles in the transfer portal, Joey. You and I have been raving about J.C. Davis throughout the offseason. I think he was one of the biggest additions to this team, on par with Terrence Brooks, on par with Zachary Franklin, because of how hard it is to find players of his talent, of his experience at that premium position. And he has done nothing but impress the staff more and more and more the way he's gone on. And we got to see him really in action. You watch the film at New Mexico, and you see the pass protector. It all translates. But then you see him move. You see him dominate in the spring game. I'm really high on him. I think he's an all Big Ten talent. I think he'd be an NFL draft pick next year. Saw scouts at practice the last couple of days. They're checking out the offensive line. And J.C. Davis and Zy Chrysler are 2 of those guys that they are checking out. But Melvin Priestley is what an addition. We thought maybe just a depth guy could potentially back up tackle, potentially back up guard, maybe a swing guy. he has impressed them with his power and athleticism, and he has experience playing a tackle. He's got to clean up penalties from last year, but most of those are out of physicality. So if those guys, we think JC Davis is going to be good, but if Melvin Priestley can be a above average good starting right tackle, I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism. He has to prove it. JC Davis has to prove it at this level. But the fact that those guys have impressed this staff to this point, that Melvin Priestley doesn't seem to really have competition for that job, despite having Brandon Henderson, despite Hunter Whitenack being here, I think that's a positive sign.
Yeah, I've got nothing more on JC Davis. I just plug and play for, right? Like you're plug and play for a reason. Everything they thought they were getting, it sounds like they've gotten out of him. And they challenged him to up his physicality, to play, kind of dominate in the way that you think Illinois offensive lines have done. It sounds like he's matched that challenge early on in his tenure. Priestley was just a huge surprise. He was. And you heard his name in the spring as kind of one of those 5 guys, like just maybe early on, a little quiet whispers like, hey, Priestley's looking pretty good. Hey.
I mean, we heard it after like just Tank's initial workouts, right? The way this guy moves, the way this guy explodes, pay attention to him. Like, so they were, I think, a little bit shocked. I mean, he was a good recruit that you wrote a phenomenal story. Let's plug that, Joey. What a feature, what a story he is. And I think anybody who reads is going to be a huge fan of Melvin Priestley, but the talent is clearly there, and they've loved what he's brought mentality-wise to that group, as you said, to get back to what they are, which is an imposing offensive line.
Yeah, and to your point, he had 24 penalties last year, and I guess shame on us for waiting until August to go track what those were. We probably should have done that. If we're being honest, we should have done that earlier, but we didn't. And those penalties aren't 24 holding penalties. They're not. There were holds in there, right? But like you're worried more about that if it's a foundational issue where he's not grasping how to go about that blocking element. They were unnecessary roughness penalties. They were false start penalties. I get it. Like after what the secondary looked like last year with some penalties, if you hear that, you think, oh no, right? Because like you got to clean those up. You can't have those 15-yard, really costly, unnecessary roughness penalties. And you believe in the staff to do it and to clean it up and to Melvin to clean it up, or you don't. But I think there's reason to think that, okay, yeah, we want him to play physical. Obviously, the Big Ten is a physical league. I wouldn't expect a rash of unnecessary roughness penalties out of him. And to be honest, if you start having a ton, Brandon Henderson's sitting right there, right? Like there's someone behind him who can say, look, you're not going out there if you keep doing this. And he told me, I asked him about it, and he said, kind of trying to make a name for myself. Like, I know the penalties are bad. I know I shouldn't do that. And you can probably, some of that physicality probably flies more in the Big Ten than it did in the SWAC. I mean, it's true, right? But he's not running from it. He said there's no excuse. I shouldn't have had those. But that's, I guess, the long-winded point is you're more comfortable that you can coach those things out of somebody quickly than having to break down hand placement and holding penalties. Yeah, I mean, huge surprise. Right tackle was a problem last year. It was. Alex Palczewski being gone in the NFL was a huge miss. Like they missed him a lot, and they never solved that. So if Priestley can solve that, then you feel good about your returning interior, and you have no questions. I have very minimal questions about JC Davis on the left side.
And when it comes to depth, Joey, like Kevin Wigginton started 6 games at Michigan State and had a PFF grade of 69, 70, which is good, which is like above average, a solid, good starter. So the fact that he's like fighting for a 7th or 8th spot or 9th spot on this offensive line is really encouraging. Desmond Schuster is not practiced the last couple of days, but has practiced and has been healthy before and is a big, powerful presence. Hunter Whitenack started 3 games last year. Wasn't great, but he now has that experience. You know, you can put him into a game and at least compete. And then, of course, Brandon Henderson we'll get into here is a huge part of this. But you have guys that have played games. Like we didn't know what they had 6, 7, 8 last year. You now have guys who have at least been tested. And from all things the staff has said, Bart Miller, Barry Lunny, they feel way more confident that they can throw their 6th, 7th, 8th guy out there and still have success in the offensive line. So that all has to prove out, I know, but this staff is sounding way more confident about that than they did a year ago.
Yeah, look, to put it in perspective, there were years early on in the Bielema tenure that I don't know that they would comfortably have said they had 5 guys. Yeah. They were like over the moon about putting out there. You kind of had to patchwork and make stuff work, and I feel very confident they have 5 that they believe in, and I'm going to put let's say 6 actually, because I think Brandon Henderson is unquestionably in that mix. So look, offensive line does take time too, right? Like that position in particular, in defensive line, it's just a maturation process you've got to go through to be able to hold up in the trenches. And when you don't have that, it looks bad. You've seen that in 2017, like 2018. We reference that a lot, but it's such a good example of, hey, these guys are in the NFL now, but it was pretty rocky early on for those guys.
Brett Bielema got all that attention, probably not fairly, for saying that, hey, our depth is an issue on the offensive line in 2021. Like, so we don't have it too deep, because they really didn't. They had 5 guys that they needed to pray stay healthy. Now they usually have to go to a 6th or 7th guy. And that was really exposed last year. That offensive line of recruiting that Lovie Smith did not do his first couple of years. And then Illinois just made sure they didn't go get that one extra guy in going into last year, so that if something happened, we have another playable guy.
Well, they tried, right? They tried with Des Schuster. In fairness to them, they did.
But they went and got, I thought, 2 more guys. Like, they got J.C. Davis plus Kevin Wigginton.
Yeah,
plus
you would have liked to see one more.
Melvin Priestley. Yeah, so like you just would have liked to have seen one more. Like, yeah, sure, the Schuster thing, but still could use a tackle. We were talking about last year. Like, could they use another tackle here? They went out and addressed that this year, so that's absolutely huge. All right, let's flip to the X factor and let's have the Brandon Henderson conversation, because the last 3 seasons under Brett Bielema, they've had 5 guys who did not start the season play more than 200 snaps on the offensive line. So you need a 6th, so a lot of times a 7th guy that's going to play a lot, because injuries happen at every position. You get rolled up. Some guy gets hurt at some point in the season. Brandon Henderson could be the backup at all 5 spots. I would guess 4 spots, but he might be, if J.C. Davis gets hurt, he might be your plug. Like, he might come in and play left tackle. That would be my guess. If Priestley gets hurt, I think he comes in and potentially plays right tackle. Him and Whitenack might be an interesting conversation. But either of the guard spots, I think Henderson might be the top guy there. And recently he's been taking snaps at center with Josh Kreutz dealing with this minor knee injury. So he seems like the 6th man, the swing man, and he's got a lot of value and versatility. He's huge, 6'5", 320 pounds. He's athletic. He's powerful. He got a couple snaps last year. He's had up and down off season, but it sounds like he's having a better training camp. And he's the next guy up long term that could be the next NFL draft prospect of this group. So him being your 6th guy, like, think about that. If Gesky was your 6th guy last year instead of your 4th guy.
Yeah, Henderson certainly looks the part. He looked the part last year as a true freshman. He's just a massive guy, moves really, really well. It's a good flip in retrospect for them. Part of that Miles McVay, Paris Patterson, Brandon Henderson trio at East St. Louis. McVay, certainly for obvious reasons, got a lot of attention, but Henderson looks like a pretty good get out of that, and a guy that I know Illinois was really high on, even within that trio in terms of his potential. The fact that I think he is the backup at 4 spots, and to be honest, if J.C. Davis weren't here, he'd probably be your starting left tackle right now. I think there was a point last year where they were kind of planning on rolling with him at left tackle. Obviously, you go out and you get a guy who's really talented, J.C. Davis, an NFL guy. But I think even until probably fall camp stabilized it a little bit, I believe the right tackle position was a competition throughout spring, and something that maybe it solidified itself towards the back end, but still opportunity in the summer for Henderson to come up. And I think it's probably more a case of what Melvin Priestley did and what Melvin Priestley showed versus anything Brandon Henderson did or didn't do. But I think he would be the guy at both of those spots. A guard, I think so too. I think Des Schuster, a right guard. I know we haven't seen him practice the last couple of days, but he's a guy who's really powerful, who's sneaky, kind of pushing his way up that depth chart as I understand it. And left guard, I don't know. I'm just going to get lazy, right, and say it's Henderson, because
I think it's Henderson.
Yeah. I mean, maybe Wigginton would be in that conversation as well. But yeah, I mean, he's got huge value, Jeremy. And I expect he'll play 100+ snaps this season, because that's how it goes on the line in the Big Ten.
Oh, he will likely start multiple games, right? Like that's Hunter Whitenack started 3 games last year. Was it Blake Jarasati came in and had to start a couple games a few years ago?
Was it 2022? They were relatively healthy, right?
Well, 2020, they were very healthy, I believe, on the offensive line.
22, they were too, except for Pearl missed
Yeah.
Indiana. But otherwise, if I'm not mistaken, they were pretty consistent left to right in 22.
Yeah, right. And then they rotated Jordan Slaughter,
Yeah.
So Jordan Slaughter started a couple games last year. Like they're going to need those guys at some point. I expect Brandon Henderson to play many, many snaps. All right, give me an interesting long-term prospect before we dive into the depth chart here, Joey.
We should take Brandon Henderson to all. Check him off.
Well, he's going to
for all these. I think it's TJ McMillan. I do. I think he's a guy who I know he's a guy right now competing for that backup center job with Kevin Wigginton. I think TJ is probably a guy who I would think, if fully healthy, and we saw him back at practice today, would be a guy who takes that. He's been in the system. He knows it. They recruited him very similar to the way that you think of Josh Kreutz. Like, he is a center. TJ McMillan is a center. I don't know there's a lot of positional flexibility with him. I know they loved his game coming out of high school, the way he controls things and the way he carries himself. He's obviously a coach's kid. Yep, that's exactly right. All the buzzwords that you would think of when you think of a center, he checks that out. And Josh Kreutz has got this year, next year, and then I would imagine that's TJ McMillan's job moving forward in the center position. And Bart Miller's kind of his structure has a lot of responsibility, makes a lot of calls, controls that offensive line. I don't think it's any coincidence that position's been a team captain on the offensive side of the ball during Brett Bielema's tenure. I think he's a guy who, after Kreutz, is the very clear next in line to me. And that's interesting because right now we don't expect Kreutz to miss the Eastern Illinois game, but it's Eastern Illinois, right? Like, if you were going to be extra precautious with him, you could see TJ McMillan in that role. I don't think that's the ideal thing, and Brett Bielema certainly didn't lay that expectation out. I think he's the next guy.
Yeah, a few other guys. I know people are curious about Maunus Moeller. He has really improved. He's fighting for a 2-deep spot. He rotates in a lot as a second string left tackle from what we've seen. Now, I think Henderson would be that guy if he comes in. He's so long that it can be almost a detriment to him. So I just want to mention him. He has made a lot of progress, and he's fighting for that 2-deep spot. I do think Zach Amlin's an interesting guy. He's dealt with some injuries at tackle. Kellen Francis, the JUCO edition, is probably out for the season with an injury. But of the freshmen, there's 2 huge dudes. Like, Illinois has gotten so much bigger on the offensive line. Brandon Hansen, in-state kid, playing at guard right now. I think that's probably where he'll stay. He's built like Hunter Whiteneck, but I think he's a little bit more athletic. But Zafir Stewart, man, is an imposing dude. 3-star prospect out of Philadelphia. Really bright kid. I enjoyed chatting with him for our freshman focus. But he looks the part. Like, he kind of reminds you a little bit of Brandon Henderson when he came in here. Needs development, needs strength and conditioning program.
Would have loved to get him in the spring, I think.
Yeah. So, like, he's a year or 2 away, but just that size, like, he's a legit tackle prospect that had a bunch of Power 5 offers. So he really intrigues me seeing him in uniform because I do think long term, it's hard to find tackles. Zafir Stewart's a legit tackle prospect.
Yeah, probably right tackle, I would think, too. Like, he's a guy who he's kind of got that
left tackle from what I've seen, man. So that intrigues me even more.
Immediately, I'm assuming Henderson will be when Zafir Stewart comes up. But yeah, I mean, you can't have enough tackles early in this tenure. Jeremy, we saw a lot of interior guys they recruited the heck out of, and it's like, ooh, he's going to play tackle down the line here. And then they went to the portal, by the way, to go get tackles for this year. Now you're seeing with Henderson, with Stewart, you're seeing some more tackle prospects kind of materialize, and that's encouraging because I do like what they have on the inside.
All right, so depth chart. Let's repeat this from left to right. Left tackle J.C. Davis, first string. Left guard Josh Geske. Center Josh Kreutz. Right guard Zy Chrysler. Right tackle Melvin Priestley. That has been pretty dang consistent since the start of spring ball, and we do not expect it to change, barring Josh Kreutz still dealing with the knee injury going into the season opener. All right. Offensive line 2. This is what I have from left to right.
Brandon
Henderson. McMillan. Henderson. All right, so you make the case. Of those, which one would Henderson have to fend off somebody to be the next guy? Like, which position would it have to be besides center for it not to be Brandon Henderson to bring somebody in?
I think it's right guard. I think there's a lot to Des Schuster. I do. I know last year was a bummer for him with his he confirmed it, his heart issue, when he got onto campus, and it wasn't anything they knew ahead of time. They got him for the intake physical and found that, and that sidelined him for the season. He's really powerful, Jeremy. He was a guy who I think would have been in that 2 deep a year ago, especially given the state of where things were. Probably is your 6th or 7th guy, right, alongside Henderson in that conversation. I think he could push a little bit more. He might be a guy we're not talking about to this point enough. So if there were one of those 4, I think that would be the easiest case for me to make. I don't know if you could make an easier one.
No, because I think he's probably 7 or 8, right, on the depth chart. Can Whitenack get in there? I just don't. Is he quick enough? Is he fast enough for that tackle spot? But he does have that road grader potential, and I just wonder with Wigginton and more snaps. We've heard good things about how he's practicing team periods. It's just that experience, man, could play a huge role. Like that guy's not going to be afraid to go out, even if he doesn't practice all that well. He has competed well in Big Ten games, so maybe he can get himself into that mix. But so Whitenack,
can we agree it's guards? Like one of the 2 guard spots would be the most competition.
Yeah, because I'd still think Henderson would be first in for Whitenack. Now, if like the right guard and right tackle both got hurt,
well, you got bigger problems.
Yeah, is it Schuster and Henderson, or is it Henderson at guard and Whitenack at right tackle? I don't know. That'd be an interesting conversation, but I think it's Henderson at 4 spots. I do think McMillan right now probably has that lead, unless Henderson gives him enough confidence at center, and maybe he can be the backup there too. But I
don't have a lot of faith in that one.
Yeah, I mean,
he just started center like a week ago, so I think your 2 centers are McMillan and Wigginton behind Josh Fruits.
All right, Joey. So what are your expectations for the Illinois offensive line in 2024 after, say, a disappointing 2023? We were high on this group last year going in because they had Pearl and Adams, and we thought Kreutz and Chrysler and Geske or Whitenack or whatever could just be solid. It did not turn out to be the case until, game 7 when they started really settling it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much stock you do or don't want to put in the Joe Moore Award, but Illinois needs to be a name as you get into October and November on that list. That's what they set the standard to be. I think that's what we have to also acknowledge. Like they've set the standard for what they want this to be at a very high level. And for the 22 season and really a little bit in 21, like they've lived to that. They got to that point. So you need to be in that conversation as one of the 20, 25 best lines in the country, and reputation helps with the Joe Moore Award, right? It does. And Brett Bielema has that reputation that's going to help that. But you got to be able to run the ball. Mm-hmm. Like that, your expectations are, whatever the case is, you got to be able to run the ball for 150 yards a game. And you need the offensive line and health, obviously, running back. You need the offensive line to open that door and to get you there. And they just didn't do that at times last season. And of course, like Luke Altmaier took too many sacks. He was responsible for a handful of those, and the offensive line was responsible for the other handful. Like, you've got to clean that up. I don't really know how to, put that in terms of like expectations, but you've got to cut the sacks in half. But you took 24 last year, is that right?
That 32, I think.
30. You got to cut that in half.
Yeah.
You got to cut sacks in half, and you've got to be able to get 150 yards on the ground.
Yeah, 4 yards carry, right? Something over that. I thought there were times last year they could run the ball, especially when Caden Fagan was in the game. But you got to be able to convert on those shorts, those goal line situations. Even when they keep saying this, even when the opponent knows you're going to run the ball, we have to be able to run the ball, which with an undersized guy at center, sometimes you get concerned about. But they, other than Kreutz, they are massive up front. This is a big offensive line. Like Melvin Priestley is one of these smaller guys at 6'4", 310, 315. JC Davis is massive. The guards are huge with Chrysler and Geske, as you've mentioned. Like Geske looks like a tackle. Whitenack's huge. Henderson's huge. This should be an offensive line that can move. And I know last year didn't go as we expected, but the last 6 games were kind of what I expected, which was a solid to good Big Ten offensive line group. So that's my bare minimum, is this is a solid offensive line. I do think this can be one of the strengths of the team, because I think JC Davis is an NFL player. I think Zy Chrysler is going to have a chance in an NFL training camp next year. I think Josh Kreutz has a chance to be an all Big Ten center. Geske seems to have really come on during the past year and during the off season. And then, like if you actually have depth, Brandon Henderson, is he better than Jordan Slaughter? I think he's got the potential to be that this year, right? I think
more versatile.
Yeah, and he's bigger. So I think this should be a group that improves. Is it going to be Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan? I don't think so. So like the Joe Moore Award stuff, I get it. That's a standard they set.
I'm just trying to think of like what could be a target, right? Like you can't. That's what came to mind. Be a semifinals, and there's like 100 of them.
But I think they can be one of the better offensive lines in the Big Ten for sure. I mean, we keep mentioning top half, but I think this can be better than that in the Big Ten. And they seem very confident in it. And I give them credibility with that. I really do. With Brett Bielema and Bart Miller, I give them credibility that they're going to be good. So I expect this to be a better unit, and I do think it'll be a stronger part of the offense. And if they're good, Caden Fagan's going to be good. If they're good, Luke Altmaier should be pretty good, right? So if they're good, I think this offense can really, really click.
Yeah, they've talked about like they've got to be the kind of the anchor of this offense, right? They've got to take that pride in leading the way and opening the door for all of that. It's cliche as hell, but I think they can be that group. I think there's a lot of talent. Like they've done a good job of blending talent and depth with this group, and we've seen. Well, we haven't really seen depth anytime recently on the Illinois offensive line, but we've seen talent, right? We saw Badarian Lowe, Doug Kramer, Alex Pilstrom, Alex Palczewski. They didn't have depth. It seems like over time they've started to merge those two together in a way that we just haven't seen, at least on paper, in the Brett Bielema tenure here.
All right, I want to take a minute to tell you about Home Field Apparel because they are the premium collegiate apparel brand, and they're based in nearby Indianapolis. Home Field sent me a few shirts, and what I love about them is, of course, they have incredibly comfortable, well-fitting shirts, but they also have officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs, and they have more than 180 plus available colleges, including, yes, your Illinois Fighting Illini. They have great gear for the upcoming football season, so for the warm weather games, check out their Script Illini t-shirt, the Orange Ringer tee, the vintage Oski Wawa helmet, or for the fall chillier games, check out the Script Illini hoodie, the Flying Illini hoodie, the Flying Illini quarter zip, and if they're still available, you might want to check out homefieldapparel.com for this. Check out their Script Bomber jacket. It is awesome. Also, don't miss their Can't Miss Kickoff 2024 campaign. So Homefield is giving away these special football boxes, and these platinum VIP boxes include 3 never-before-seen items from your school that are not available anywhere else. They're curated so fans have new gear to wear all season long, suitable for all weather conditions. And these platinum boxes also include other exclusive items, including a new hat or ringer, a VIP koozie, and a 2024 Platinum Pass, which guarantees 20% off and early access to your school's football releases through the 2024 season. The football boxes are available on August 9th, so these will sell out quick, so go check them out. Go to homefieldapparel.com to check out their great selection of Illini gear and use code Illini24, that's all capitals, Illini24 for 15% off. That's Illini24 for 15% off at homefieldapparel.com. All right, let's switch to special teams, which, I mean, Caleb Griffin made some big kicks last year. Under the radar, what a bounce back for Hugh Robertson to go from arguably the worst punter in his first year as starter, taking over for Blake Hayes, especially due to just an inconsistency, and some of his punts really hurt Illinois in losses, to I thought he was good, like middle of the pack punter, which is what I thought, hey, can you do that? I thought he was at least that last season. So that was kind of under the radar. But man, just some huge miscues in the return game, both kick return and punt return. So special teams really ended up hurting you in a few of those games, notably Nebraska and Northwestern. Just 2 brutal losses for Illinois last year. But for my top storyline, it's Mr. David Olano, the former All-American kicker, because Caleb was pretty good after a rough start to the season last year, but he hit the game winner against Toledo. And I expect Illinois to be in close games, Joey. And Caleb Griffin made some key kicks in close games. David Olano is going to have to do that. And Illinois has quite a kicker tradition here. So I think this is the big storyline for me. Probably where you were going is going to be my X factor. But I think David Olano continuing that kicker tradition for Illinois, because I think there's going to be a lot of close games and a lot of kicks that are going to matter.
All right. I thought for sure the big storyline was not turning the ball over on returns.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that. I do. David Olano, we talked about this at Media Day, getting like just kickoffs. I know that doesn't necessarily move the needle for everybody to see some kickoffs, and he knows he struggled at times on kickoffs. But that was really valuable experience for him to get out there and feel the rush of a game at Iowa, to feel the rush of a home game in a close environment where you got to deliver on kickoffs. It's a little thing that obviously when we talk about kickers, our mind always goes to field goals. It always goes to PATs. I do think that'll help him, and he's got a monster leg for a little-ish guy, and he's probably not even really like that small. It's just you had Caleb Griffin, who was like a jumbo kicker before David Olano. He's got a really powerful leg, especially when you look at his frame. I just think that'll all kind of come together for him and give him a chance to keep that tradition going. I don't know to what level. I mean, Chase McLaughlin was really good. James McCourt was really good. Caleb Griffin had some consistency issues early, ended up to be a really good kicker at Illinois. I still think Ethan, help me out, Jeremy. Well, Ethan M. I think I can type his last name. I can't say it. Like that's good competition for him. Texas A&M transfer kicker, a guy who was really rated highly the year before David Olano came to Illinois. That's solid competition. And maybe we'll see a split of responsibilities with him and David Olano. Maybe one handles kickoff, one handles point after and field goal. Both guys have good legs. Both guys are pushing each other. We were talking today, though. I don't know that I've seen David Olano miss during and we see a lot of special teams. Like, we can complain until we're blue in the face about what we don't see. We see a ton of special teams. I don't know that he's missed a lot. And Robby Discher always says, hey, knock on wood, David Olano hasn't missed in a year and a half. Or, like I'm being a little dramatic about it, but he seems very consistent out there.
Absolutely. I feel like more confident that we can talk about the kicking game, the punting game, than anything, because we see a ton of it with special teams. So this is the most insightful part of the previews you're probably going to get. I don't know if I was asking, like, have I seen a miss? Like, there's sometimes we can't see exactly the angle. Did it get over to get, inside the upright there? But you hear Brett Bielema going for a perfect day, and then he hits a 50-yarder. The leg is there. The pedigree is there. The confidence seems to be there with David Olano. And I like that they brought in Ethan Magzolski. They have Fabrizio Pintone, went in the transfer portal and is back as a walk-on. I like their options there, but David Olano seems like to no doubt have this job, which is huge because, again, Illinois is just in so many close games that we've seen how much kicking matters over the last couple of years, and it's going to continue to matter.
I'm not going to say no doubt. I think he's a front runner. I think this is sneakier competition. I think it's a sneakier competition than you think.
It's David Olano.
Ethan Magzolski. I'm not going to be lazy. I'm going to pronounce his name correctly here. Look, I don't think he's going to win it. I think it's sneakier. At least at one point in camp, it was sneakier than no doubt. I think he's come in and done a nice job. But yes, I do think it's Olano, and I'm going and expecting David Olano to be the starting kicker. But I think Ethan Magzolski has pushed him a lot more than maybe we would think from the outside looking in.
I love the addition because they didn't want to just hand the job. They wanted David Olano to win it. But I don't know. Maybe I'm looking too much into this. I feel like if Magzolski was really like pushing for this job, we would see Olano and Magzolski kicking every day in those competitions. We see that rotating. It's Olano and Magzolski, Olano and Pinton, Olano and Magzolski, but Olano's the constant, and they're getting him as many reps as possible for a reason.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, again, I don't think he's not going to have it. I just think Ethan Magzolski has pushed this a little more. I wouldn't be surprised to see Ethan on kickoffs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that it's probably a little bit more, but yes, it's David Olano. They brought him in here on scholarship to make a quick impact, right? Like they knew they had Caleb Griffin, and they brought him in here to be their kicker in 2024, and certainly he's on path to do that.
So they've had 3 guys playing the All-American game for high school, and 2 of them are kickers. Olano and Maxolski.
Yeah.
Nobody. Why aren't we writing about that, Joey? They're killing it in this kicker recruiting.
Are we not even going to get into long snapping, Jeremy?
Big
news this week.
Is this our X Factor?
Aiden Hall stand up.
Yeah.
He's back. We joke. I mean, Lane Hanson's going to be the long snapper. To just get this out of the way now. But Ethan Hall.
I wonder how many people actually knew Lane Hanson. That name is the starting long snapper. Diehards, great job. Lane Hanson, younger brother Jake Hanson, for those that don't know, has been the starter the last 2 years. Aiden Hall and Hanson split duties in 2022. Hall was the punter snapper and Hanson was the field goal PAT snapper. And then last year, Hanson won both jobs. But Aiden Hall graduated, right? And then was he working, doing a job?
Internship in Milwaukee. That ended. He returned on Monday. Now, they had the extra roster spot. And here's the thing. The portal is closed. You can't – I don't know. Like, you can say you're going in the portal. I don't know where you're going. But it isn't – like, no one can contact you at that point, right? So if you're adding someone in mid-August, as Illinois did with Aiden Hall, probably going to be someone who's enrolled at your school already. Aiden Hall was. He has that. It's just veteran experience, right? And they have Pat Mahoney. Is that, as the other long snaps. I know people are like, are we seriously going into – but, like, look.
2 minutes of long snapper talk on this pod.
Hey, when that thing – if long snapping goes south, somebody's going to be ticked off about it, right? Like, they've got 3 guys. Lane Hanson's going to have the job. But before we get into, Jeremy, the X factors, which I think is very – well, mine is clear. It's got to be punt return. It's got to be returning. You got to secure the ball. They had infinitely too many –
Can Illinois catch the ball on punt returns? That is the hugest X factor of this entire special teams unit, because
it might be the biggest story, but we'll call it the X factor if that's what you insist.
Well, whatever. It's a nice way to chop this up. But yeah, it's just Isaiah Williams was a good punt returner, except the times he couldn't haul in the ball. And then, there are other times that they've struggled to do this throughout the years. And it's one of the hardest jobs in football. Like, I'm not saying it's easy, but they got to find somebody who can do it. And it seems to be right now Hank Beatty, who has done it, did it last year. Do I have in my mind, did he fumble one at one point? And I think he recovered it last year. So at least
might be right. Yeah.
at least he's got some experience doing it. I don't need a guy who can return the ball. Like, Caleb Griffin was an insanely valuable punt returner because he just caught the ball. Like, I can remember a couple of years ago, he's a walk-on, great kid. Jordan Holmes had a couple fumbles in one game that really hurt Illinois. That Nebraska game changed after Illinois fumbled it. Like, Nebraska was barely moving the ball. They get the ball inside the 15, take the lead, and that was basically a game. And then the Northwestern game, just ridiculous.
Wasn't there also a block punt against Nebraska?
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, that was a disaster.
Those issues.
Every offseason, every fall camp, training camp, we sit here and it's like, hey, could they get someone who's a little more dynamic back there? Could they get a couple extra yards on punt return? And then so let's just stop with that, right? Because then by October, they're going out there and they're saying, hey, how you doing to everybody? And they're doing the fair catch wave and they're securing that. And they're going to the sideline and giving the offense the ball because there's value in that. There's value in that versus 8 extra yards.
One of the biggest values is a guy who goes up and catches the ball rather than letting it bounce and go an extra 15 yards and losing it. Like, that to me is as valuable as returning it 6 yards per punt return, right? Is just securing the ball so it doesn't, take a bounce and put your offense in an even worse spot. So Hank Beatty appears to be the guy. Matt Grossetich goes back and returns punts as well. And another guy who you feel like has good hands is Zachary Franklin's getting some reps there. So those are 3 guys to watch, but I would imagine it's going to be Hank Beatty.
Yeah, I asked him, I said, you practicing your mayoral wave to everybody, letting them know? He said, I hope they can see me. Might have to get like a flare gun or something like for the fair catches for him. It's going to be Hank Beatty. It is. We can get into kick return now because that was obviously against Northwestern. That was an issue for Illinois.
I'm not too concerned about it. I thought Kenari Wilcher looked pretty dang good as a kick returner last year and had the one best return he had called back because of a Tip Ryman holding call. I feel like in his career, he's going to
house one.
He's going to be the first guy since Vangelo Bentley in 2013, 2012 to return a kickoff for a touchdown. And maybe it won't happen because the rule is going to change at some point and go to the NFL, though that might give you more opportunity to do it. I feel like he's got the chance to do it because he's got speed, he's decisive, and he's been doing it for a while. So I thought for a freshman, he looked pretty good doing it last year.
Yeah, there was a game, the game he took one back and had it called back. He had a great return early before that. And I think we looked at each other like, he's going to take one back here this season. And of course, 2 kicks later or whatever it was, he did. Yeah, I mean, Northwestern, that finale wasn't great. That's going to stick in the mind of people. But he was consistent for what they needed him to do back there. And there's a little more return. Like, there's a little more opportunity to return with kick than punt. Punt is just a hang on for dear life and get the offense out there. There's some opportunity there. And I think he's going to be the guy. I don't know who's going to be alongside him back there. Is it going to be Aiden Lawfrey? I mean, that would make sense from a speed standpoint. We've seen Pat Bryant back there. I just wonder if the juice is worth the squeeze to have your number one receiver back there for kick return. But there's a little more optimism there, I think, Jeremy.
Yeah. Josh McCray, Aiden Lawfrey, 2 guys that you can probably be the up guys there. So they could get a couple returns, but Canary will be the guy. And yeah, obviously the fumble that hurt against Northwestern, but
it hurt him too. I think he's mentioned it since then. Like, that was a rough moment for him.
Yeah. So we'll see. But yeah, those are the 2 guys to watch there. Interesting long-term prospect, special teams. Go ahead. Declan Dooley?
I mean, the answer is David Olano, but we've already talked about him at length. He's going to be the kicker for the next two or 3 years. So it's got to be Declan Dooley because someone's got to – Hugh Robertson has another year after this season. He's got the 2025 year of eligibility. Hugh Robertson is 32 years old, 31, 32 years old. He's going to get one. Yeah, he's engaged. Congratulations to Hugh and his fiance. Is he going to be interested in another year of college football? He didn't really commit one way or the other when we talked to him at Media Day the other day. I don't know, right? I mean, you're just kind of getting to the point where you want to have your life and move on with your life. So Declan Dooley is a guy that they invested a scholarship in, another in-state guy in the class of 2023 that they wanted to get and invested a scholarship. He's got a huge left leg. I know that they like that. It sounds silly, but they like the fact that he's a lefty and the way that it comes off of his foot differently. But I think he's still probably a little bit raw. We saw practice yesterday, and he shanked a few. It just wasn't pretty. I'm not going to put the weight of his punting on 2 or 3 punts we saw in one practice in August, but I guess I don't know how much he's ever truly pushed Hugh Robertson. After that 2022 season, it felt like the opportunity for someone to push Hugh was there when Hugh struggled with consistency. And I just don't know that he ever did that. Feels like,
yeah,
it is. And I feel like he needed a little more time, but he's an interesting guy with what he's able to do from a power standpoint. And from being a lefty, he could be a guy who takes that reign for a couple of years after Hugh.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'd put Dooley there, because he might have to be the guy next year. Pinton is battling Dooley for the backup spot right now. So I think Dooley's got to be more consistent. But I mean, he's as jacked as anybody on the team for a punter. So Illinois had that with Steve Weatherford and now Declan Dooley. But the consistency thing is what he would definitely have to work on. But he's an interesting long-term prospect for sure, and a local kid. So it'll be interesting to see if he has to play at some point, how he would do. Depth chart, kicker, it's Olano. Is it Pinton or Moxolski? I would probably go Moxolski, right? Just pedigree there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then punter, Hugh Robertson. I'd be interested. Would it be Pinton right now?
Maybe. I think. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. We've seen kind of minimal in terms of like punting. I don't know if there's a big enough difference there.
I think it's a battle right now.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with that.
Punt returner Hank Beatty. I think Resetich Franklin. Kick returner Wilcher Lawfrey, and I would think Bryant would be the backup.
Probably. There's so many humans we see back there during.
Mario Sanders could be one too.
Yeah,
at some of these positions too.
Can we hold on? Can we just real quick, Jeremy? We kind of glossed over Hugh Robertson, and I think we need to take a second to talk about how much better he was last year. He got a lot of heat in 2022, and he deserved some heat for his performance. Go.
Let's go into expectations, and let's start with Hugh Robertson, because I thought he was a middle of the pack punter last year. Way less inconsistency, right? There's always going to be a bad punt or two, but I thought he was actually a big strength of the special teams last year was he was far more consistent. The numbers prove that out, and the eye test proved that out.
Yeah, his hang time was better, Jeremy. His hang time was up from 3.69 in 2022 to 3.77. He had 9 fewer attempts, so obviously like the total yardage is down, but yards per punt was up 2 yards. His net was up 1.5 yards. He had 19 inside the 20. His return percentage went up a little bit. I just think overall, like it was rough. It was a rough watch from a consistent standpoint. His good punts, you think to the Iowa game, his good punts were very good in 2022, but then you go to Michigan State after that and it got rough, and he really leveled out. I just think that kind of gets glossed over a little bit. And I'm curious now what a third year starting will look like for him, but he should be expected now as a third year starter to be a strength of the special teams outfit.
Yeah.
And I think he's earned that in the way that he went last year.
Yeah. I don't think he's Blake Hayes, right? He's not that.
No, Blake Hayes is like one of the 2 best to come through Illinois.
Yeah, one of the top guys. So I don't think he's that, but I think he's a solid Big Ten starter as your punter. I expect David Olano to continue this tradition, man. Like I am confident that he's going to take this job based on what we've seen, what we've heard. Maybe that confidence can rub some people the wrong way, but I want that in this position. And I haven't seen everything we've seen in practice. Again, this is one of the things we actually see in practice. I don't know why he wouldn't, get this job. Of course, it's different when you get into a stadium, you get into a windy night in Champaign in November. It can be more difficult, but the pedigree is there, and everything we've seen in practice says this kid's got it.
Yeah, he's not shy on confidence. He kind of, I don't want to say famously told Brad Bielema in his story that he didn't need the red shirt last year because to think he was going to be long for the college football experience. And I asked him about that. I said I wouldn't change it. Like I knew the way I'd been kicking in spring, the way I had kicked prior to getting here. Like I knew I was in a good spot, and I think he kind of proved that out to be the case outside of maybe 2 or 3 kickoffs last year, Jeremy. So I do think it's fair to think that he's going to keep this kicker tradition going. And can he be a guy? I mean, he's got the leg to give you a threat from 50 plus in that neighborhood, and to be pretty, like, remember Caleb was good on longer ones, a little inconsistent on some of those inside the 40. I have that right, don't I?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think if you can mix those two, and Caleb obviously did at the back end of his career, he was very, very clutch too. I mean, that was a huge thing for Caleb Griffin. But yeah, they brought David Olano in to continue that tradition of strong kicking at Illinois.
I don't know what to expect out of the punt return game. Kick return and punt return, just don't fumble. Don't lose a fumble. That would be a successful season for me. I think Canary can be really good. I think he can be a really good returner. I'm not expecting Hank Beatty to return it for a touchdown. I'm not expecting him to do that. I don't need him to do that for punt return. Just secure the ball. That's all I need on that. So it's a question mark for me. Is the punt return game, to be honest with you, because we saw Beatty doing a pretty good job the first game. Like before Zakari really started to do it, Macroset started to do it. I think there was a reason those two moved to punt return, because we saw some issues with the guys that were behind Hank Beatty before that.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up last year's stats to see how many they actually tried to return, because let me see here.
Well, Isaiah had like 16 for 120, I think, was his end stats.
Punt total for Illinois was 12 for 133 on returns. That feels low, doesn't it?
I thought it was like 16 or something.
Returns. Isaiah Williams, 11 punt returns for 127 yards.
Which is great. Great.
Hank Beatty, 1 for 6. So that's 12.
Yeah.
Over under returns at 10.5.
Under. I want it to be under.
Yes, that's right. I would agree. Like 10.5 kind of felt like a high end for me. Like I don't know if I would 9.5, 8.5. I would be harder pressed to guess, but I think it's just becoming clear. It's not just Illinois. Just get the ball to your offense. Just field it.
Unless you have a Charlie Jones, like just catch the ball. Now if there's like 10 yards of green in front of you, yeah, sure, go run the ball. But if there's people around, just catch the ball.
Yeah, I'm with you. And again, that's not exclusive to Illinois, but given what happened a year ago, it feels like a priority at Illinois to just catch the darn ball.
All right, give me, because we haven't talked about coverage units. Give me a name or two. That's going to be great in coverage.
James Kurtz.
My guy, Jaheim Clark.
Ooh, okay.
Fast, tenacious. I think he's one I would watch. Another guy that interests me is Demetrius Hill. Maybe not as quick twitch as like a guy like Jaheim Clark. Caleb Patterson, I think, is going to be in the mix there. Torrey Cox, could he be one?
Yeah. We're talking like gunners, right?
Yeah, gunners. Guys who can go down the field and make
That's usually a DB.
Future Tanner Heckle, to me, is really intriguing.
I don't know how far in the future.
Special teams, he could be making.
He could be an intriguing special teams guy.
We would have thought Easton Baker if it weren't for the injury.
Yeah, I haven't seen him dressed in the last couple practices. James Kurtz, man, he is an insane person. I mean that in the way that you want your football players to be very violent and very tenacious. I think he could be a guy who just, maybe it's not like as a gunner, but if one of those where if like you zoom out and they show a replay of someone just absolutely eviscerating someone on the return team, he will be doing that at least once this year. I think he, as that linebacker situation feels fairly solidified, he'll find his role there. Special teams screams James Kurtz back this year.
All right. So how confident are you in a positive special team season? Because last year,
negative.
Probably negative, yeah.
Because the moments were so glaring, right? Like the negative moments just were so in your face that you forget that Hugh had a bounce back year, that you forget that Caleb Griffin had his moments.
They so clearly led to losses, but then there was the Caleb Griffin kicks that clearly led to wins, right? Like,
but I still don't think that teeters it even to like neutral, right? Like I think it was a negative last year. I'm looking for just neutral, just being neutral. Because like even the negative last year, you took 7 off the board with Wiltshire.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember which game that was, so I can't remember the outcome. It was a home game. I know that to be sure.
I think it was Indiana.
No,
they ended up winning the game.
Yeah, they ended up winning. Just be neutral. Just be neutral. Don't have any glaring mistakes on returns, and just be serviceable for Hugh Robertson. Be serviceable for David Olano. Like those two, I think could push this into a little bit more positive territory because I believe in their talents and what they do.
Yeah.
5.5. I'm confidence level to make this a positive.
All right. So Brett Bielema cares a lot about special teams, right? Cares a lot.
Robby Discher
puts a lot of time into it. Robby Discher was once the special teams coordinator of the year by Football Scoop or one of those organizations, I believe. I think he's good at his job. It's just now, do you have enough experience there? Have you built up enough depth to where you can kind of correct some of these issues? It's just these game-crushing moments. You got to get them out. Like, I think you said be neutral. I think the special teams has to be a positive. For a team that needs to start winning more in the margins, I think special teams is a huge part of that. I think their offense is going to be a plus. I don't know if their defense will be. It's still out for debate. Like I have to see it after what I saw last year. So that means to me, they got to win some games on special teams. And I thought they did that their first couple of years with Brett Bielema, and special teams killed them in a couple critical games last year. So for me, it has to be a positive. I tend to be optimistic. I like Olano. I like Hugh Robertson is a solid Big Ten starter. I think Wiltshire can be good. I think Discher and Bielema generally are pretty good at this, but it's just after last year, it's hard to get those things out of your head. Can Illinois stop having those huge mistakes on special teams?
Okay, so the more I hear, I agree. Like those negative moments are such a cloud. They are such a cloud.
Game.
They did 100%. No excuses for those. What we didn't mention, I think it's worth mentioning, Johnny Newton got his hands on some PATs and some field goals. Like a lot, like 4, I think.
4.
Like a pretty absurd number. Robby Discher in his history has shown an ability and kind of an emphasis on blocking punts. I think you'll see more of that this year. So like maybe I should look at it as something with the potential to be a positive. be neutral in the return game and be positive in the other parts of the special teams operation.
Can you get that punt block that turns a game? Can you make that big difference there? Not just making kicks and punting and covering, but yeah, make that game-changing play with a return or a punt block, something like that. Can you swing it your way this year? I think they need that. I think Illinois is going to need one or two of those moments to have a bowl opportunity this year.
It's funny we're talking about this because when you think special teams, like being a positive, flipping the game, you think about returns, and I'm not. I'm thinking about the blocks. I'm thinking about those strong punts where you pin a team deep, where you kick a long field goal that maybe you probably didn't have a lot of business making, but you hit it just right. Like that's what I'm thinking. And returns just don't mess up.
Yeah,
that's where I'm at.
Man, that was good 25, 30 minutes of special teams talk right there, Joey. Including a couple minutes of long snapper talk.
The long snapper.
Dude, how many people did we lose at that moment?
Oh, God. We should have waited until right about the 59
If you are still here at this point in the podcast, you are the diehards. We love you. We love you for it.
I would love to, like, someone's just stuck in traffic, kind of ticked off about it, and then we get into long snapper. Oh, man, we just ruined a day or two.
All right. That'll do it for us on the offensive line and special teams. We'll do the defensive front coming up next, defensive line and outside linebackers, and then we'll wrap up later this week with linebackers and defensive backs. We are going to get, apparently, a whole practice to watch, and then we're going to get shut down from training camp. So hopefully we get that later this week and get a little bit more insight. But we've been loaded with coverage at IlliniInquirer.com. You can check it all out there. If you haven't yet, go read Joey's piece on Melvin Priestley. It was phenomenal work by Joey, and we really appreciate Melvin and the people around him for telling that story, because you'll become a Melvin Priestley fan and be rooting for him after reading that story. So really, really well done with that, Joey. But check everything out at IlliniInquirer.com. Thank you for listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review, wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on YouTube. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell as well. For Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Werner. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.